Good evening, everyone. It's really a delight to be here, and thanks for everyone that showed up, in the rain and everything. So yeah, thanks. And of course, a special thanks for Dr. Justin Bengry and for any other facilitator of this event for all the effort that was put throughout the last months in bringing us here and creating this event. So yeah, thank you very much. We are very honored and excited for this talk. My name is Dothan, and this is Yoav. Justin pretty much said whatever I wanted to say.
And just to say that right over there is Adi, which is another member of our project, and she's a film activist, so she's also documenting us right now.
So I'll just repeat it. The Haifa Queer History Project is a grassroots activist research and documentation project that we started in the year of 2015, and in an attempt to unearth our city's queer history and make it available for our local community as a source of pride and belonging, as a resource for community building. And as you can hear, English is not our native tongue, so please excuse that it will assist the text that we've pre-written.
Okay, so a little bit about the project. So for the past 3 years, we have been researching the queer history of our own community in Haifa. Haifa is a city, a port city in the northern side of Israel-Palestine. It's a mixed city of both Jews and Arabs. And in our work, we create, together with another fourth team member that is not here today, is currently working in Haifa, and a few part-time volunteers, on a repository of LGBT plus experience, existence, and resistance in Haifa, and mainly through the conduction of video recorded interviews, but also the collection of archival material. We have so far conducted 15 interviews. 7 of them were with people who identify as men, 8 with people who identify as women. All men identify as gay. 6 of the women identify as being lesbian, and 2 of them identify as being on the trans spectrum. What else do I want to say? Okay, 13 interviewees identify as Jewish or Israeli. 2 of them identify as Palestinians. Our interviewees range in age from 44 years old to 72 years old. And our growing archive consists, next to this video recorded interview conversations, of documents that were donated by informants, including photographs, meeting protocols, letters, party invitations, basically anything that has something to do with queer history. And we also archive contemporary items, so we have a sense that today's present would be someone else's history, so we're trying to start the work now for the next generation of historians. And what else do I want to say at this part? And finally, we actively seek and collect representations of LGBT plus figures or themes in old newspapers or other types of media. All in all, the archive encompasses histories ranging from the early 1950s up until present days.
So next to our archival efforts, our project also, as Justin mentioned, deals with making these histories accessible to the public. We regularly guide walking tours in Haifa and maintain presence in social media while working towards launching the website, we hope will be very soon, with an online catalog of our archive. The crowning glory of our efforts to make queer history more accessible and present is our annual Haifa Queer History Festival that will celebrate this year its second year, and will start on the January 31st, so
next week.
Very, very soon. And we are very lucky and happy to host Justin as a keynote speaker in the Queer History Conference that will be one of the events in the festival. Before we focus on the theme of today's talk, we want to present a bit of our work through a video that Adi made. Actually, originally it was a trailer for a documentary, so one of the things we are trying to do is create a docu-series or film that would tell the story of Haifa's queer history, and this was a trailer for a pitching, but it includes one of the characters that we will talk about in the later part of the talk, and I think it really shows beautifully what we're doing. So here it goes.
יום אחד אבא שלי, הייתי בת 15, מגלה במספדה קטנה שהייתה לי, במחבוא בסלון, בתוך המספדה באות, כלי פור, נעלי עקב, כל הבגדים של נשים. הוא בא לאמא שלי, אומר לה, תשמעי, לזו אין פורים פעם בשנה, זו יש לה פורים כל יום, משהו פה לא בסדר איתה.
חיפה היא העיר לכל הקהילות. אתם קהילה אהודה, מצויה, ותמשיכו לעשות את מה שאתם עושים.
בית לקהילה! בית לקהילה! בית לקהילה! תקציבים לקהילה! תקציבים לקהילה!
Hopefully one day we can show you also the movie. So today we would like to focus on several characters whose stories can be found in our archive. Through them we wish to look at the relations between identity, narrative and Haifa's city space. And let us start with a quote from one of our interviews.
And then one last sentence, because the small clip kind of deals with the project in general, and today we're going to talk about something more specific. We just want to say that in the Q&A part, you're more than welcome to ask about any aspect of the project and not just the main topic of the talk. The quote. Okay. So really the thing with the police in the parks was funny. Like they would come for no reason, just walking around the park looking for kids. One would come from here and another would come from there.
Show me an ID.
I have no idea.
What are you here? For what purpose? Are you looking for something?
So this conversation, taken from one of the interviews we conducted, is between a police officer and a gay man at the public park. This type of conversation is almost a cliche of the power relations between a representative of the law and a member of an excluded minority group. The script of these conversations usually starts with the trick question, are you looking for something? From this point, it splits to three possible answers that represent three different attitudes of the minority towards the political center. The first answer approves the power relations without opposing them directly. No, officer, I'm only walking through the park on my way home. Or, yes, I came to the park since I'm a pervert and I have no other place to go. This kind of answer accepts the marginal status of the queer, his pervertedness, and the supremacy of the officer supervising his actions. The second possible answer is the openly oppositional one, that which turns the power structure on its head, defies against the negative marking of the societal margins, and recognizes the life in it as preferable over the normative life. This answer conflicts with the law. Yes, I have come here for casual sex with strange men in a public space. What are you going to do about it? Or do you want a blowjob? We want to address a third possible answer, even more subversive in our view, as it does not intend to invert the power structure, but denies its existence in the first place. And that is, no, I am not looking for anything.
We will try to examine this third attitude as it arises from the testimonies of cruising in the city space of Haifa. This talk was conceived in Hebrew, a fairly economical language that binds cruising, roaming, vagrancy, loitering, and flaneurism in a single word. Thus, when we talk about cruising, we mean it in the broadest sense of the word. Our analysis will center around two of the interviews that we have conducted as part of the project with Nancy Schneider, whom you've seen in the film.
On the right top corner.
Yeah, she's a transgender woman. Next to her in the upper left corner is Eyal Friedlander, a gay man. And we will also analyze written documents and the autobiography of Zalman Shoshi, who is in the left bottom corner, who was an effeminate homosexual that was made nationally famous in the 70s and 80s. And also the story of the Palestinian trans woman Mahmoud Ariad, that is in the right bottom corner, as it was captured in a newspaper article in 1975. All of these characters grew up in Haifa. In addition, we will address a couple of other characters whose experiences and actions are relevant to our argument. We will juxtapose these different narratives of cruising with cruising as a spatial political stance, as it has been described by the French scholar Michel de Sartot in his essay Walking in the City. Following de Sartot, we might think of the city as a spatial power structure. The city planners purposefully plan specific uses for different parts of the city, certain normative behaviors, a desire to the direction for movement. De Sartot assumes that the daily uses of the city space correspond with this power structure. Sometimes oblige it, sometimes add restrictions over existing ones, and sometimes use the city subversively and creatively, moving in opposing or unpredictable directions. We would address de Sartot's concept of deviation and creativity while walking in the city, which we will call here a cruising stance, in three levels of abstraction. Firstly, we shall examine the cruising of our interviewees and protagonists in the physical space of the city. Secondly, we shall describe their cruising within metaphorical spaces of power and through social boundaries. And finally, we shall examine the narrative through which these four characters describe their experiences. We start at examining the cruising through the city space.
De Sartot describes the walking in the city, the daily uses that the city dwellers make of the space, as a challenge to the pretense of city planners. The walkers are free to use the urban space for unintended purposes, moving forward or backwards and in unexpected directions. Lingering, walking faster or slower as part of a stream or in incomprehensible ways. These are all ways in which the city walkers play with power structures or object them. This kind of relation to space is prominent in the stories of the characters we have researched so far.
Eyal Friedlander, a gay man, an artist and an activist, who was the head of the local gay organization in the mid-90s, told us the following. All in all, the interesting and pleasant encounters are the random ones. Not when you go out looking for a specific thing, but when you look for one thing and find another. I remember that some of the people I have met in the park and became friends with me in Binyamin Park near the theater, there were these get-togethers, dinners, in which there was always someone you didn't know before. Eyal celebrates the unintended and the unfamiliar. He prefers the instances in which you don't go looking for a specific thing, and anyhow, what you find is another thing. More so, Eyal's uses of the public park defy the intentionalist spatial logic. This kind of logic might prefer the public park to be used only for decent activities, such as family picnics, or taking the dog for a walk, or flying kites. In this kind of logic, there is no place for sexual activity in the bushes under cover of darkness. Had this logic been willing to recognize such an activity, it would limit it to very constricted spaces and times, a red light district, for example, separated from other human activities. Eyal's testimony reveals that the park was a space for sexual encounters just as much as for social gatherings in a closeted reality in which these encounters could not have taken place in apartments.
Another description of the spatial cruising stance comes from Nancy Schneider, a renowned trans woman in Israel that was born and raised in Haifa. And Nancy told us the following. And we were loitering all over town in our childhood. We would wander all over the city, in the port, here, there, and we went watching, how is it called? Tennis. And after the game, we got to speak to one of the players, and she told us that she's a ballet teacher. And we told her that we wanted to learn how to dance, but we came from low-income families. It was a country that had nothing in it. There was absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I was a very developed child, and I was also always this type of Columbus, the first one to discover things. Nancy testifies that she and Gila Goldstein, which is another trans woman originally from Haifa, that was made an icon in the queer community in Israel, were loitering and wandering all over the city. Loitering and wandering are actions that are done for the sake of the window, perhaps as a part of a wild character. Whoever loiters or wanders similarly to someone who cruises does not go to school or work and is not on his or her way to go shopping. This cruising stance leads to unexpected results, such as a conversation between who were two young boys at the time being, and a ballet teacher. Nancy's comparison to herself to Columbus is intriguing as well. Much like Eyal, this comparison prefers the unfamiliar over the already known, and views the city as a terra incognita to be explored, discovered, and conquered. We now turn to examine cruising through societal orders.
Space is a useful metaphor through which to deconstruct societal structure. Common language describes societal power relations in terms like center and margins, and defines political achievements usually as a movement from society's margins towards its center. Using this terminology, we suggest that a cruising stance would include a curious play with societal boundaries and a continuous movement between the center and the margins while giving up the ideal of centralization. This stance can also be extracted from Zalman Shoshi's description of his appointment in the military's recruitment office. In 1969, as I approached the mandatory army draft age, I was summoned to the recruitment office in Haifa. A committee of officers met me to test whether I am fit for army service. Anyone who read my book so far understands how funny this idea is. I arrived as a renowned gay man in Haifa.
If you would be enlisted to the army and would carry a gun, and someone would try to infiltrate through the border, will you kill him?
They asked as I stepped in. If he would have a big cock, I would suck him, hand him my gun, and let him cross the border. I answered as an advocate for peace and sex work.
It is clear that Shoshi rejects the expected hierarchy between a draftee and a committee of officers. In front of the nameless officers he describes in his book, he stands as a renowned gay man, and it is unclear which side is superior to whom. Moreover, in a machoistic and militarized society, as the Israeli society was after the triumph at the 1967 war and before the traumatic 1973 war, Shoshi displays a feminine, sexually promiscuous, and a pacifistic persona, an advocate for peace and sex work in his own words. He warmly embraces the margins as his desired position. It is interesting to observe that the crossing of the societal border here is expressed through a clear spatial metaphor, infiltrating a national border. We have here, in fact, a triangle which has 3 edges. The first is Shoshi's permeable body that is being penetrated by the infiltrator. The second edge is the state's border, which Shoshi gladly helps the infiltrator to penetrate. And the third edge is the social norm that demands Shoshi to be a man and a soldier, another border he breaches. The cruising stance enables Shoshi some playfulness regarding his social status and positioning, as he is willing to embrace his marginality when it is useful to him, but does not view it as an ideal to which society as a whole should aspire. In Nancy's interview, we find another way of breaching a societal border, but in a different way. Gila and I were in Tel Aviv. It was Independence Day, and, well, how are we going to go to a party? We didn't have any shoes, no clothes, no nothing. And we wanted to put on a show, to perform at the party, because we were dancers. Alchipova, a ballet teacher, we knew where her studio was and broke in. We stole women's ballet dresses to perform. So, I don't know, what other burglaries did we do? We constantly broke into places all the time. The pivotal word organizing this piece is, of course, breaking in. Nancy and Gila break into a ballet studio to steal clothes for a performance. Physical breaking. The material spatial aspect envelops, in this case, the social aspect as well. Nancy and Gila break the borders of normative behavior into the realms of criminality. Additionally, the nature of this specific breaking, performed by 2 male boys at the time, studying ballet and wishing to perform in feminine attire in a gay party in Tel Aviv, transgresses other societal borders, gender and age norms. Nancy describes a useful breaking. She and Gila do not break the law in order to live a glamorous underworld life. They break into the ballet studio because they need clothes and do not have the money to buy them. Similarly, they traverse borders of gender and age back and forth. They dress as women to put on a show, and they blend adult behaviors with behaviors associated as childish. In doing so, we suggest, they take a cruising stance. They acknowledge the existence of boundaries, but move through space freely, without confining themselves to one specific side of the line.
Another aspect of cruising through social boundaries, which is merely hinted in Shoshi's recollection of his encounter with the draft committee, is the act of cruising through ethnic and national identities. As we mentioned before, Haifa is a mixed city of both Jews and Arabs, a fact that has special significance to its central cruising sites. During the 1960s and the 1970s, cruising spaces in the city were used by Arabs and Jews alike, and alongside the different types of relationships that were formed within these spaces, we find evidence to a fluid, sometimes humoristic attitude towards ethnic and national identities. One example of this uncommon attitude can be found in Nancy's recollection of her first visit to Haifa after going through a gender reassignment surgery in Switzerland in the end of the 1960s. Everybody called me Nancy, Nancy, Nancy. That was all you could hear. Dalida, they called me at the time because I was nicknamed Dalida in my childhood. They nicknamed everyone. Gila was named Gila after Gila Golan, who was a famous Israeli film actor and model. And I was named Dalida because I looked like her, like the Egyptian, French, Italian singer who rose to fame during the 1950s and 60s. Everyone was given a name, so I was given Dalida. And at the beginning of 1971, they still called me Dalida because that was what they knew, and they haven't gotten used to Nancy. In this part of the interview, Nancy addresses the various names that she used over the years, focusing on a couple of different origins for her former name, Dalida. One origin of the name Dalida points to a childhood nickname. Perhaps this nickname was acquired as part of a membership in a group of transgenders and homosexuals. If so, it functions as a sign of belonging, similarly to names given to soldiers or sailors or gang members. Another origin of Dalida stems from the physical resemblance between Nancy and the famous singer that you can see in the pictures. Dalida's stage name tells an intricate story of performance and ethnic identity in itself. She was born Yolanda Cristina Gigliotti. The singer first used the then popular Arab name Dalila as a stage name, after later shifting to Dalida in order to improve her appeal to European crowds, thus swinging between European and Oriental names. Dalida's own story ties together both possible origins of Nancy's childhood nickname. It is a marker of acceptance into a society of sexual and gender deviants for whom larger-than-life feminine characters like Dalida were a source of inspiration. At the same time, Nancy's experiments in crafting her own identity and choosing appropriate names for her changing persona mirror Dalida's changing personas. Like the multi-ethnic star, Nancy too changed her name to a European-sounding one, Nancy, to fit her emerging international persona.
Another example of cruising through ethnic and national identities by switching ethnically coded names can be found in an interview with Mahmouda Riyad, a Palestinian trans woman who during the 1960s and 1970s was a known figure in Haifa's cruising spaces. My nickname is Naomi Sharon, but my real name is Mahmouda Riyad. Mahmouda is illiterate. She spent her childhood herding goats. During those years, the young teenager discovered his profound weakness for sex and men. When you are born gay, you have no choice, she says. Of course I would prefer having kids, to be married and also have a son. I love kids, but from which side of my body should I make them? From behind or the front? Now I am an artist in my village and a travesty in the city, and all I get is mockery. Much like Nancy, Mahmouda changed her name for various purposes. She adopted two different names. The first was Mahmouda, originally Mahmoud, a common Arabic boy's name, accompanied by the ending a sound, used in Hebrew and Arabic as a gender marker for female nouns. The second was Naomi Sharon, which is a bluntly Hebrew feminine name. Although Mahmouda clearly stated to the reporters that her Arabic name is real and her Hebrew name is a nickname, the mixed use that she makes of the two points to the porosity of identity categories in her narrative. On the one hand, Mahmouda presents a clear ethnic and national distinction through the separation of nickname and real name. On the other hand, she embodies a colorful multilingual existence in which ethnic and national identities can be exchanged in accordance to the speaker's need or wish at the time. For reasons ranging from self-promotion in sex work or striptease shows, through needs for personal safety and anonymity, to the mere pleasure and amusement of playing with categories. We suggest that this mixed use of Hebrew, Western, and Arabic-sounding names by characters like Nancy and Mahmouda exhibits a cruising stance towards these categories that favors the speaker's ad hoc needs and wishes rather than actual stable identities. We shall finish our talk with the examination of cruising as a form of narrative.
The Sartor states that the act of walking is to the urban system what the speech act is to the language. The walking of passers-by offers a series of turns, tours, and detours that can be compared to turns of phrase or stylistic figures. There is a rhetoric of walking. Mirroring the Sartor's interpretation of walking in the city as a text, we wish to analyze text as walking in the city. We will propose that the turns of phrase and stylistic figures that characterize Shoshi's narrative are the textual equivalent to cruising in the city. Zalman Shoshi's autobiography is scattered with vagueness. It is often hard to figure out the correct order or the exact dates of events. The text is also vague regarding gender. Here's an interesting example. Devoid of a warm home that creates content to life rather than being merely walls, I roamed Haifa searching for human warmth and means to sustain my soul and body. The public gardens attracted me in particular. I was drawn to the myriad of colors of the flowers and was excited about the different recreational equipment pieces that were installed in them. I was a little boy who walked the streets and gardens with the appearance of a girl. I walked to the garden to suck the nectar from the wood sorrels and did not conceive in my virgin mind that something far less innocent is crawling there. Men with a defective moral code lurk amongst the colorful flowers. Thus I entered the gardens as Zalman and came out as Shoshi.
Firstly, we wish to point out that this is a spatial narrative. It starts with the falling apart of the home and the move into streets, and ends with entering the gardens with the masculine first name Zalman, and coming out of it with the feminine first name Shoshi. This is to say that the garden functions here as some sort of a cocoon, in which Zalman is going through a gender transformation. We suggest reading this transformation not as a binary gender inversion, but as an adoption of a cruising identity, a renunciation of Zalman's gender coherence and its replacement with Shoshi's multifaceted queerness.
Additionally, we cannot ignore Shoshi's self-description as a little boy that walked the streets and the gardens with the appearance of a girl. What you see in Zalman is not what you get. It cannot be flattened into coherence. Cruising the city echoes his queer, playful, and performative gender identity. Just as cruising the city will not conform to a predictable itinerary in space, Shoshi narrates his life in an unpredictable, incoherent way, a narrative that won't submit to chronological conventions and that brings forward an image of gender that cannot be worded clearly.
It seems that Eyal's, Nancy's, Mahmouda's, and Shoshi's stances toward the urban space, societal borders, and themselves reflect each other. They comprise a multidirectional, equivocal, dynamic, playful, creative, and subversive stance, without necessarily meaning to do so. A cruising stance. It is hard to determine whether this is a cruising identity that developed from the practice of physically cruising the city. Is it a spatial practice that stemmed from a cruising identity, or maybe some sort of a dialectic of the two? It is possible, nonetheless, to indicate an entirety of the self that encompasses identity and practice, in which the transgression of gender and sexuality's heteronorms is accompanied with that of other norms and boundaries as well.
Our opening statement suggested that a cruising stance is a possible answer to the police officer inquiring about the actions of gay men in public parks. In other words, we indicated that the entirety of the cruiser's personality might spring a politics of cruising. That suggestion will have to be elaborated on a different occasion. For now, we will suffice with pointing again and more clearly to a notion that we had only implied in the beginning. That queer existence does not have to be limited to the dichotomy of accepting the social order or trying to turn it on its head. Sometimes it can cruise through such dichotomies and sometimes wander to entirely different terrains. Thank you for your time.